Mycenaean women were extensively documented in the Linear B administrative tablets found at major centers like Pylos and Knossos. These clay tablets provide a unique, direct source of information about the actual economic functions and social status of nearly 2,000 women in late Bronze Age Greece. Mycenaean palatial institutions organized and controlled much of the female workforce, especially in production sectors. The palace elite organized a strict division of labor and specialization in production as a means of managing and concentrating economic surplus. Textile production was the single most important industry for female laborers within the palatial economy. Thousands of women were involved in the various stages of cloth production, from spinning and dyeing to weaving different types of fabrics, a process vital for internal use and trade. Women engaged in textile work were often organized into large supervised work groups listed by their specific occupations. These included linen workers, sewing women, and makers of headbands, indicating a highly specialized and structured system of production. The textile labor system made extensive use of both local core fey labor and potentially enslaved women captured during military raids. While not all were slaves, many were considered low-status workers who labored under compulsory systems to meet specific production targets set by the palace. Some women were identified in the tablets by their ethnic origins, suggesting they were foreign-born and likely brought in as a result of conflict or trade. For instance, records from Pylos mention groups of women from as far away as the coast of Turkey, highlighting the multi-ethnic nature of the labor force. Women also performed various food production and domestic duties for the palace administration. Examples from the tablets include groups identified as flour grinders and bath attendants, tasks that required continual, often repetitive, labor. Gender segregation was a prominent feature of the Mycenaean workforce, with most tasks considered either exclusively feminine or masculine. Few occupations appear to have been accessible to both sexes, indicating rigid gender-specific assignments within the palatial context. A higher social and economic status for women was found within the religious sector. Women serving as priestesses and cult officials often held significant influence and were among the highest-ranking women mentioned in the texts. Elite women in religious offices could control substantial property and land leases, granting them a degree of economic autonomy not available to common laborers. These priestesses were sometimes enabled to engage in legal disputes and were awarded plots of land by the damos or local community, functioning with considerable independence. Elite women's wealth and status is further evidenced by opulent grave goods found in their burials, such as elaborate jewelry and ritual objects. The presence of such rich adornments in tholos tombs and shaft graves suggests their status sometimes rivaled that of male elites. Some women held administrative or supervisory roles within the palatial system, overseeing labor groups and managing resources. One prominent woman, Cassandra, is recorded as receiving large quantities of foodstuffs, suggesting she was a high-ranking labor supervisor. Women were sometimes referred to as wanassa, a title often interpreted as queen or lady, who held a position of administrative and religious authority alongside male rulers. This figure was likely involved in ceremonial duties, estate management, and potentially diplomatic functions, underscoring her high status. The palace administration recorded a small group of individuals referred to as slaves of the god Tiojo du Ira, who were predominantly women. These individuals held a unique status tied to the religious sector, and their position was sometimes passed down to their children. Despite some high-status positions, women in general were often associated with low-status occupations in the Linear B tablets compared to the elite male officials who dominated the administration. The majority of recorded women belonged to collective work groups and were positioned near the bottom of the strict social hierarchy, often alongside slaves. Women's work, particularly in textile production, was integrated into the palace's wealth finance system, which involved the production of luxury goods for elite display and trade. The massive scale of the industry, involving tens of thousands of sheep to supply the wool, highlights its central role in generating palatial wealth. Women's involvement in the production of high-status goods, like elaborate textiles, suggests they were vital to maintaining elite identity and power both internally and in foreign trade. These products were likely used as high-value trade items or gifts in diplomatic exchanges, enhancing the palace's prestige. While textual evidence is limited, archaeological evidence such as the presence of grinding stones and cooking vessels suggests women were heavily involved in subsistence activities within the domestic sphere outside of the palatial records. These essential daily tasks were likely performed by women in their households, although not typically recorded in the official palace accounts. There were regional differences in the roles of women between different Mycenaean centers, such as Pylos and Knossos. For example, women appear more frequently in high religious roles at Pylos, while at Knossos they were often concentrated in the textile industry. The palatial economy relied heavily on the consistent, large-scale labor provided by female work groups. The administration tracked wool allocations and cloth production targets in meticulous detail, demonstrating the crucial economic importance of this female workforce. Women's work in the palace workshops was considered essential labor, and they received rations of food, such as grain and figs, as compensation. These rations were a form of payment for their work, managed and distributed by the central administration. The emphasis on female deities and priestesses in iconography and texts suggests a significant, if often underrepresented, female presence in the spiritual life of the Mycenaean world. This spiritual authority may have provided some women with unofficial influence beyond their immediate economic roles. Women's social status was largely defined by their occupation within the palatial system. A priestess held a much higher status than a grain grinder, even though both were women participating in the economy. The Linear B tablets, being purely administrative records, offer limited insight into the private or family lives of Mycenaean women. The records only mention women in contexts where they interacted with the economic institutions of the palace, filtering their lives through a bureaucratic lens. The Mycenaean system was largely patriarchal, and all the highest elite political officials documented in the Linear B tablets were men. Women rarely held top political positions or owned land independently of religious roles, reflecting a male-dominated power structure. Some women were likely captured as booty during military campaigns in the Aegean and Asia Minor and forced into labor within the palace economy. These enslaved women formed a significant, low-status segment of the workforce, particularly in large-scale production, like textile making. The large numbers of women documented in the Linear B texts, around 2,000, show that female labor was a cornerstone of the palatial economic model. Their extensive presence in these official records underscores their structural importance to the functioning of the palace centers. The products made by women were subject to precise accounting and quality control by palace scribes. Tables detail different types of cloth and the amounts of raw wool allocated, indicating a structured system of quotas and inventory management. Women, in specific religious roles, had the right to challenge or engage in legal and political disputes. This suggests that religious status offered certain high-ranking women legal standing and a degree of social leverage. The mistress Potnia was a prominent female deity in Mycenaean religion, perhaps reflecting the elevated status of mortal women who served her. The presence of powerful goddess figures in the pantheon may have symbolically reinforced the importance of women in religious contexts. The term doulos, slave, or servant, appears for both men and women in the tablets, but women were the majority of the enslaved workforce recorded in production and cult practices. This points to a gender dimension of slavery in Mycenaean society, with female slaves concentrated in specific economic sectors. Women's economic activities were often linked to local towns and villages rather than exclusively within the palace complex itself. At Knossos, many women worked in their local communities under the central control of the palatial administration, not necessarily living within the citadel walls. Women received specific rations related to their work assignments, which varied depending on their status and the type of labor performed. This system of payment indicates a highly structured and hierarchical compensation model managed by the palace bureaucracy. The administrative records also hint at a hierarchy among women themselves, with distinctions based on class, rank, and occupation. A female overseer commanded more resources and authority than a simple weaver, demonstrating internal social stratification among women. The Mycenaean palaces engaged in specialized production of perfumed oils, an industry where women were also likely employed. Women might have been involved in the processes of creating luxury goods like scented oils and ointments, used for elite consumption and trade. Iconographic evidence, such as wall paintings and gold rings, frequently depicts women participating in ritual activities. These artistic representations support the textual evidence that women held vital roles in orchestrating and performing religious ceremonies. The economic power of women was often concentrated in their ability to manage resources and labor, related to their specific roles, especially within the religious sphere. Women in religious roles held rights to land and resources that set them apart from the general population, highlighting their unique economic standing. The palace administration's intensive recording of female laborers was a reflection of the elite's desire to control and maximize surplus production. The detailed inventory and production records show a top-down approach to managing all economically significant activity, including female labor. The Wanasa likely held a dual role that blended religious and secular economic authority. She may have managed large estates and overseen ceremonial duties, acting as a powerful female figure within the palace structure. Female labor was often considered menial, repetitive, and potentially unending by scholars, examining the nature of the tasks assigned in the tablets. Occupations like grinding grain or carrying water were physically demanding and low status, but essential for daily palace operations. Women engaged in textile work were provided with raw materials like wool by the palace, and were expected to meet specific production targets. This system, known as tarasija, was a form of obligatory labor tightly controlled by the administration. The high value placed on ornate textiles and personal adornments in Mycenaean society elevated the importance of the female artisans who produced them. The demand for these luxury goods, found as grave offerings, made the women's skills economically essential to the elite's self-fashioning. Women involved in religious cults sometimes functioned outside the direct ration system of the palatial economy at Pylos. Their compensation was not always recorded by the central palace, suggesting an alternative system of support, possibly through temple estates. The social situation of most Mycenaean women was ultimately patriarchal and restrictive, compared to men in positions of power. Despite some individual examples of high status, the overall system favored male authority and control. The archaeological record of tools and installations related to textile labor demonstrates that women produced textiles on both a household and large-scale workshop basis. This shows a spectrum of production scales, from domestic use to centralized palatial production, with women involved in all levels. The classification of female workers as either slaves or free laborers remains a subject of debate among scholars. Some early theories suggested they were free contract laborers, but the consensus points towards a mix of enslaved and obligated workers. The detailed information about women in the Linear B tablets is a major source for understanding women's history in ancient Greece, extending the timeline of evidence by centuries. These administrative texts offer a rare glimpse into the actual economic lives of women during the Late Bronze Age. Women played a crucial role in maintaining divine favor through ritual performance and intercession, which had significant social and economic importance. The spiritual life of the citadel depended on these female cult officials to ensure the goodwill of the gods for the community's prosperity. While men appear more frequently in the records related to land ownership and top administrative roles, women's contributions through specialized labor were systematically documented and essential for the palace's wealth. The division of labor placed women in production roles that generated the material wealth the elite utilized. The study of women's roles in the palatial economy highlights the complexity and heterogeneity of the Mycenaean world across different regions. Gender structures and economic opportunities for women likely varied between palatial centers like Pylos, Knossos, and Mycenae itself.